Scott Nearing was an American radical economist, educator, writer, political activist, and advocate of simple living. Biography. The early years. Nearing was born in Morris Run, Tioga County, Pennsylvania, the heart of the state's coal country. Nearing's grandfather, Winfield Scott Nearing, had arrived in Tioga County with his family in 1864, at the age of 35, when he accepted a job as a civil and mining engineer. Before the end of the year, he had assumed full control of mining operations as the superintendent of the Morris Run Coal Company, a position of authority which he held for the remainder of his working life. An intense, driven man, Scott Nearing's grandfather studied science and nature, practiced gardening and carpentry, and regularly received crates of books from New York City, amassing a large personal library. In his memoirs written late in his life, Scott Nearing would recall his grandfather as one of the foremost influential figures in his life. Nearing's upbringing was that of a young bourgeois, his mother employing a part-time tutor and two Polish servants to clean the gleaming White House atop a hill overlooking the town. Scott's brother recalled that the citizens of Morris Run had treated the handsome and intelligent Scott the way they would treat the heir to the nobleman. They all treated him with awe. Nearing's father was a small businessman and stockbroker, his mother a vigorous, energetic, and idealistic woman whom Nearing later credited with instilling in him an appreciation for the higher things in life, nature, books, and the arts. Despite an upbringing in a life of privilege made possible in no small measure by the harsh anti-union politics of his patriarchal grandfather, young Scott nevertheless developed a social conscience, which one of his biographers describes as a burr under his skin that none of his relatives acquired and that no interpretation satisfactorily explains. Nearing graduated from high school in 1901 and enrolled in the University of Pennsylvania Law School, where corporate bias violated his idealism that after 1 year he quit. Instead, he studied oratory at Temple University in Philadelphia and enrolled in the Wharton School of Business of the University of Pennsylvania, where he immersed himself in the emerging science of economics. At the Wharton School, Nearing was deeply influenced by Simon Nelson Patin, an innovative and unconventional educator and founding father of the American Economic Association. Nearing distinguished himself as a Wharton man during the Progressive era, one of the proverbial best and brightest, trained in practical economics to be readied for a place as a responsible leader of the community. In the words of another of his students, Patin taught innovative thinking, making use of creative intelligence to master new situations irrespective of received dogma. Nearing seems to have found these new intellectual tools for potential social change to be exciting and liberating. He completed his undergraduate program in just 3 years, while simultaneously engaging in campus politics and competitive debate. Nearing received his B.S. degree from the University of Pennsylvania in 1905 and his Ph.D. in economics in 1909. From 1905 to 1907, he served as the secretary of the Pennsylvania Child Labor Committee, a volunteer society working to solve the child labor problem in the state. From 1908 until 1915, while living in Arden, Delaware, Nearing taught economics and sociology at the Wharton School and Swarthmore College, authoring a stream of books on economics and social problems. Nearing was a staunch advocate of a new economics, which insisted that the economists part company with the ominous pictures of an overpopulated, starving world prostrate before the throne of competition, individual initiative, private property, or some other pseudo-god. and tell men in simple, straightforward language how they may combine, reshape, or overcome the laws and utilize them as a blessing instead of enduring them as a burden and a curse. Much as Karl Marx drew radical implications from the ideas of the conservative Hegel, Nearing took the economic logic of his department head, Simon Patten, and made radical inferences about wealth and the distribution of income that his mentor had himself hesitated to draw. He believed that unfettered wealth stifled initiative and impeded economic advancement, and hoped that progressive thinkers among the ownership class itself would come to realize the negative impact of economic parasitism and accept the civic duty of enlightened leadership. Nearing instead outlined an economic republicanism based upon four basic democratic concepts: equality of opportunity, civic obligation, popular government, and human rights. While living in Arden in 1910, he learned about the landlord's game, the forerunner of monopoly, and taught it to his students. This led to its spread among colleges. Nearing's aggressive social activism in the classroom and through the printed word brought him into conflict with his own employers at the University of Pennsylvania's Wharton School of Business, resulting in his dismissal and his emergence as a cause célèbre of the American radical movement for the next decade. On the morning of June 16, 1915, Nearing's secretary telephoned him to report that a letter from the provost had arrived, which noted that, as the term of your appointment as assistant professor of economics for 1915 is about to expire, I am directed by the trustees of the University of Pennsylvania to inform you that it will not be renewed. The Board of Trustees of the University of Pennsylvania was heavily stacked with bankers, corporation lawyers, financiers, and corporation executives, and Nearing's writing had not gone unnoticed. Nearing's tenuous situation had been exacerbated by an open letter to the North American in which he challenged the right-wing evangelist Billy Sunday to apply the gospel to the conditions of industrial capitalism, including the railroad interests, the traction company, the manufacturers, the vested interests. Reaction to Nearing's dismissal from the academy was swift, with department head Patten and others issuing statements condemning the decision. Progressives in the Wharton School quickly compiled a summary of the facts of the case and sent it to 1,500 newspapers, journals, and academics around the country. Even conservatives in the faculty were deeply troubled since, as one Wharton professor observed, the moment Nearing went, any conservative statement became but the spoken word of a kept professor. Conversely, some radicals were satisfied by being validated in the belief in the conservative nature of the American Academy. Socialist writer Upton Sinclair told Nearing in no uncertain terms in an open letter that, "You do not belong in a university. You belong with the socialists and freelancers." Instead of addressing small numbers of college boys, you'll be able to address large audiences of men. Nearing's dismissal was retrospectively called by one historian the most famous breach of academic freedom of the era. The years of the First World War. From the fall of 1915, Nearing was established as a radical, public man. Quote, he joined the American Union Against Militarism in 1916 and delivered a series of speeches condemning the preparedness campaign then being promoted by Woodrow Wilson and the nation's political elite. He also remained a university professor, teaching social science at city-owned Toledo University from 1915 through 1917. The intense nationalistic feeling that swept the country now that America was embroiled at last in the war in Europe spelled the end of Nearing's Toledo days. As he later recalled in his memoirs, Al Miller, chairman of the Toledo Forum, asked me to come to his office. He greeted me pleasantly and then said, "As you know, I am attorney for the Toledo Chamber of Commerce on a permanent retainer. I am the legal spokesman. They are among my clients. They have directed me to introduce a resolution at the next meeting of the Toledo University trustees, ending your connection with the institution." Quote. He waited a moment for this announcement to sink in. "Of course," I said quietly. "That is one of the symptoms of war fever. Those who tell the truth or try to tell the truth are among the first victims of any war." Al hurried on. "You understand. There is nothing personal about this. You and I have worked together on the forum and other projects with never a real disagreement, certainly never a fight." "That is true," I said, "and I think our joint efforts have helped to make some real advances here in Toledo." "True," said Al. "It is also true that I have enjoyed every minute of our cooperation." Then he added, "At this point I guess we part company. I hope we part as friends, on two sides of the war barrier that separates us." "Please remember that there is nothing personal about this," he repeated. "I respect your stand and wish you well. My duty lies elsewhere." We shook hands and I never saw him again. Nearing packed up his things and moved to New York City, where he became a founding member of the People's Council of America for Democracy and Peace, a national pacifist organization established at the First American Conference for Peace and Democracy, held May 30–31, 1917. He assumed the chairmanship of that organization that fall. On July 1, 1917, Nearing joined the Socialist Party and began a new job, working for the next 6 years as a lecturer in economics and sociology at the Socialist Party's Rand School of Social Science. Nearing was a prolific public speaker during this time, estimating that he had given approximately 200 speeches a year during the war years. Nearing authored a series of pamphlets, published by the Rand School, one of which, "The Great Madness: A Victory for the American Plutocracy," resulted in his indictment under the Espionage Act for alleged obstruction to the recruiting and enlistment service of the United States. Quote, "This indictment came down in April 1918, but it was not until February 1919, that is, several months after the war in Europe had actually ended, that the trial against Nearing and the Rand School actually commenced." The prosecution attempted to show that Nearing, by writing against militarism, had illegally interfered with the ability of the United States government to recruit and conscript troops for its military activities in Europe. It spent its effort making Nearing admit that he had written and spoken against militarism and the war in Europe, which he was quite willing to do. But at the end of the trial, Nearing addressed the jury and made a key point. The prosecution has not been able to show a single instance in which recruiting was obstructed. They have not been able to show a single instance in which insubordination, disloyalty, and refusal to duty was caused. Nearing wrote, "The only way to have intelligent public opinion is to have discussion, and the moment you check discussion you destroy democracy. The Constitution does not guarantee us only the right to be correct, we have a right to be honest and in error, and the views that I have expressed in this pamphlet are expressed honestly. I believe they were right. The future will show whether or not I was correct, but under the laws, as I understand it, and under the Constitution, as I understand it, every citizen in this country has the right to express himself on public questions." The judge in the case, Julius M. Mayer, dismissed the first 2 counts of the indictment, alleging conspiracy, without sending them to the jury. Following deliberation, the jury found Nearing not guilty but the American Socialist Society guilty on the 3rd and 4th counts of the indictment. On March 21, 1919, sentence was passed and the American Socialist Society was fined $3,000, a sum which was ultimately collected through small donations from socialists, labor groups, and civil libertarians in New York City. From socialism to communism, the Socialist Party of America split in the summer of 1919, with a factionalized communist movement leaving to forge an underground existence in the years after the Palmer raids. A significant organized left wing, inspired by the Communist International, remained in the party through 1921. Nearing does not seem to have participated in the factional politics of these years, although his sympathies may well have rested with the former socialists now building the various communist parties. As an employee of the Socialist Party-affiliated Rand School of Social Science, Nearing remained in the Socialist Party until the end of 1923. The dramatic decline of the size and strength of the Socialist Party in the first years of the 1920s took its toll on Nearing. The plummeting membership of the SPA, down below the 13,500 member mark for 1921, stood in marked contrast to the new and rapidly growing legal political party of the Communists, the Workers' Party of America, which passed the Socialist Party in size after only a few months of existence in 1922. Nearing searched his soul in a lecture delivered in January 1923 at the Rand School, later published in the Socialist Press, posing the question, "What can the radical do?" Nearing argued that the function of the radical was not administrative, but that of external critic. The communist radical of today will be the administrator of tomorrow, and the communist society will need the radical as badly as the capitalist society needs him now. It will then be the business of the radical, as it is now, not to take an appointment as Justice of the Supreme Court, not to perform any particular function as a part of the established order, but to stand apart and speak his mind about the established order. A radical who wishes to continue being a radical cannot do so if he is an essential part of the existing order, for then he owes a certain fealty to his position. I have seen socialists elected to office. They become not critical functionaries, but administrators, and one cannot be both at the same time. It was the radicals' additional function to get in touch with like-minded people in the unions, in cooperatives, and in the sphere of political propaganda, Nearing added. In the unions, it was the Communist Party's trade union educational league that was currently the liveliest thing in the trade unionism of the Middle West, attempting at boring from within to radicalize the American Federation of Labor. Outside the AFL, on the radical left, was the industrial workers of the world, attempting to found revolutionary industrial unions. In contrast, cooperators were, by the nature of the task, localized and conservative in the makeup. In Nearing's view, publishing was in disarray, with Charles H. Kerr and Amp Co. disorganized by wartime repression and the economics of publishing such that the production of low-cost books was a veritable impossibility. With regard to political action, Nearing produced concrete figures to show that since 1912, membership in the Socialist Party had steadily declined. Nearing drew an explosive conclusion from this situation. That means, if it means anything, that in the United States as it is at present organized, the radical political movements are short-lived, and if that is true, then the Socialist Party has had its day. Through the Middle West recently I found the Socialist Party almost extinct. Since 1920 it has had first the Communist Party and then the Workers' Party as rivals. The Workers' Party has fallen heir to the present radical political situation in the United States. Is it built to represent the American worker? So far the radical movement has represented the European worker in the United States. The opportunities for a radical political party are as great as, or greater than, ever before. The important problem before the Workers' Party is to get radical ideas before the workers. Its second and more serious problem is to establish proper relations with Moscow. Moscow is strong. The Workers' Workers' Party is weak. Moscow can dominate without any trouble. Despite these misgivings, the potential of the growing organization appealed to Nearing over the malaise of the fading organization. Nearing finally applied for membership in the WPA in December 1924. He was, however, initially rejected from membership, living for the next 2 years as a non-party fellow traveler of the organization. He finally gained admission to the Workers' Party only in 1927. Nearing went to work on the staff of the CP's daily newspaper, The Daily Worker, on May 9, 1928, remaining in that position until resigning in January 1930 to publish a study on imperialism which failed to meet the ideological scrutiny of the organization. According to at least one historian, Nearing was formally expelled from the CPUSA in 1930 in connection with this decision. In 1925, Nearing spent 2 months in the Soviet Union visiting schools and talking with educational authorities. It was a fascinating experience to visit this important educational laboratory in its opening experimental stages, he later recalled, noting that theories were then being actively tested with regards to subject matter, method of instruction, and social organization of students and teachers alike. The result of this visit was one of the first serious studies of the nascent Soviet educational system, a book entitled Education in Soviet Russia. In 1925 and 1926, Nearing taught a class on the law of social revolution. Members included Dale Zisman, Sam Krieger, Eve Dorff, and her husband Ben Davidson, as well as Alfred J. Brooks, Myra Page, Benjamin Mandel, and Rachel Ragozin. It also included Carrie Katz. The result of this effort was the law of social revolution, a cooperative study by the Labor Research Study Group. In 1927, Nearing made his first trip to Asia, traveling to China by ship for a 3-month stay. En route, the Kuomintang Party split, with forces loyal to Chiang Kai-shek attacking and summarily executing the former communist allies. As Nearing later recalled, leftists were liquidated on sight. The procedure was summary. When one was captured by Chiang's forces, his arms were held by 2 Chiang soldiers while a third, with a sword, hacked off his head. The remains were left lying as a warning to other leftists to follow Chiang or perish. I saw some heads mounted on poles. While there, Nearing rather boldly gave a speech at Yenching University on his book, The American Empire, in a room darkened so that audience members could not be later identified and announced. Upon his return to the United States, Nearing authored a book offering his views on the Chinese situation, entitled With a China. Nearing remained a prominent figure of the American left throughout the decade of the 1920s, producing a series of pamphlets on various radical political themes. He was also engaged professionally on the lecture circuit, making use of an agent to arrange speaking tours for about 20 years. These speaking tours continued into the early 1930s, by which time public interest in attending live speeches and debates on political themes had waned and ill health forced Nearing's agent into retirement. The Great Depression years, Nearing and his first wife, Nellie Marguerite Seeds Nearing, were the parents of John Scott. They adopted a second son, Robert Nearing. John Scott wrote a participant's account of having worked in industry in the Soviet Union during the 1930s. His book, Behind the Urals, tells of the great effort being put into building an industrial complex out of reach of an invasion, indicating that Stalin foresaw saw the Second World War, when the Purge trial started in the mid-30s, also an indication of Stalin's preparation for war. Scott was advised to leave, and escaped with his Russian wife and little daughter via the Trans-Siberian Railroad. In the 1930s and 1940s, Nearing and Helen Noth lived together in Winhall in rural Vermont, where they had purchased a rather large forest tract for $2,200 and a moderate-sized farm for $2,500. Nearing and Noth lived a largely ascetic and self-reliant life, growing much of their own food and putting up 9 stone buildings over the course of 2 decades. Cash was earned from producing maple syrup and maple sugar from the trees on the land and from Scott Nearing's occasional paid lectures. They married in 1947. Nearing wrote and self-published many pamphlets on topics such as low income, peace throughout the world, feminism, and different environmental causes. The years of the Second World War. A consistent pacifist, Nearing opposed American participation in World War II throughout the conflict. In 1943, he was fired by the Federated Press for his anti-war position, which managing editor Carl Hessler criticized as childish. Nearing was particularly shocked by the nuclear bombing of Japan, writing to President Harry S. Truman on August 6, 1945, the day the atomic bomb was dropped on Hiroshima, that "your government is no longer mine." Nearing in the Cold War period. In 1954 he co-authored Living the Good Life, How to Live Simply and Sanely in a Troubled World with his second wife, Helen. The book, in which war, famine, and poverty were discussed, described a 19-year back-to-the-land experiment, and also advocated a modern-day homesteading. In the winter of 1956-57, the couple toured Canada, Southeast Asia, the Middle East, and Europe, generating a book about their experiences called Socialists Around the World. The following winter, with the passports issued in 1956 nearing expiration, they embarked upon a trip through the Soviet Union and the People's Republic of China. The pair visited Leningrad, Moscow, Stalingrad, Baku, Tashkent, and Irkutsk, touring schools and universities, apartment buildings in the process of construction, factories, and collective farms in the course of their trip. In China they saw Peking, Wuhan and Nanking. They returned home to Brooksville, Maine to write a book of their experiences, entitled The Brave New World. The two countries were characterized in the travelogue as peaceful socialist giants. The pro-peace attitude of the people of the Soviet Union and People's China is not based on fear of war but on confidence in the theory and way of life. One Soviet trade unionist put the matter to us in this way: "We are not afraid of war. We have been through it and survived its cruelties and horrors. We know that we can take it. Just because we have been through it and suffered from it, we know how terrible war is. It wastes materials, but worse than that, it squanders human idealism, energy, wealth and life. Still worse, those of us who are trying to build a socialist society are diverted and preoccupied by war. We know from bitter experience that if we are to engage in socialist construction, we cannot fight wars. War is a full-time occupation." Quote. After their travels to the USSR and China, New Century Publishers produced Nearing's pamphlets on Eastern Europe and Cuba in 1962 and 1963. The Vietnam years and after, as the Vietnam War took center stage in the mid-1960s, and as a large back-to-the-land movement developed in the U.S., a renewed interest in Nearing's work and ideas occurred. Hundreds of anti-war believers flocked to Nearing's home in Maine to learn homesteading practical living skills. Some also to hear a master radical's anti-war message. In 1968, Nearing Nearing signed the Writers' and Editors' War Tax Protest Pledge, vowing to refuse tax payments in protest against the Vietnam War. In 1973, the University of Pennsylvania formally reversed its dismissal of Nearing in 1915 by awarding him the title of Honorary Emeritus Professor of Economics. During this time, Nearing praised Albania and described its people as rested, secure, hopeful, cheerful, adding that they are building solidly and fundamentally for a better future. Nearing appears in the film Reds as one of the many documentary witnesses, telling stories of his friend John Reed and the heady days leading up to the Russian Revolution.